He stood there, unmoving, eyes locked on the cold hospital doors. Day and night, through rain and snow, he waited. But what, or who, was he waiting for? The answer will break you. The city pulsed with life beyond the glass doors of St. Mary's Hospital, but inside, the world felt still. Hushed whispers of nurses, the rhythmic beep of heart monitors, and the quiet weight of stories unfolding within its sterile walls. Yet outside, on the cold pavement near the hospital's entrance, a lone figure stood. A German shepherd. His fur, once a brilliant shade of black and tan, had dulled under the weight of time and the elements. His deep brown eyes, intelligent and searching, fixated on the same door, unwavering. It had been weeks. The hospital staff had noticed him early on, his imposing frame always stationed in the same spot, sometimes standing, other times curled up in a tight ball against the winter chill. They had tried shooing him away, assuming he belonged to someone who would come looking. But the dog never left. He refused food from strangers, only drinking water from the puddles formed by melting snow. And when visitors entered or exited, he would lift his head, scanning faces, searching, waiting. Some of the nurses took to calling him Rex, a name fitting for his regal bearing and quiet determination. But no one knew his real name, nor his reason for standing guard outside a place where no animals were allowed. The hospital security had attempted to remove him several times, but each time, he found his way back. Even when they tried taking him to the edge of town, he somehow returned, like an unshakable ghost tethered to this place by something unseen. The staff had begun to accept him, even admire him. People passing by would stop, offering scraps of food, gentle words, but he never wavered from his silent vigil. The bond that couldn't be broken. A few blocks away from the hospital, in a small apartment that now felt eerily empty, lay the remnants of a life that once held warmth. Rex had not always been alone. Just months ago, his world revolved around a man, his human, his family. Daniel Carter had been a retired firefighter, a man who had saved countless lives, but in the end, his own heart had betrayed him. A sudden cardiac arrest had landed him in St. Mary's Hospital, and that was the last time Rex had seen him. The ambulance doors had shut, sirens had blared, and since that moment, the loyal German shepherd had known only one thing: he had to wait. Rex and Daniel's bond had been forged in fire, in the heart of danger. Daniel had adopted Rex as a puppy, training him with a discipline that came from years of service. But beyond the commands and structure, there had been love, an unspoken connection that only those who have stood side by side in the face of danger could understand. For years, they had been inseparable. They would wake at dawn, go for long runs by the riverside, and spend their evenings watching old war movies in the dim glow of the television. Rex had been there through Daniel's highs and lows, through his injuries, through the nights when memories of fallen comrades haunted his sleep. And then, one day, Daniel had collapsed. Rex had nudged him, whined, barked, anything to wake him up. But Daniel's breathing had been shallow, his eyes unfocused. When the paramedics had arrived, they had gently pulled Rex away, loading Daniel into the ambulance. The front door had shut behind them, and Rex had waited. A city that noticed, but didn't understand. At first, the people around the hospital had been dismissive. They assumed he was a stray, another abandoned dog left to fend for himself in the cold. Some had tried to lure him away with food, while others had called animal control, but every attempt to remove him had been futile. One kind old man, a street vendor named Marco, had been the first to recognize the dog's unwavering commitment. "This one," Marco had murmured, offering Rex a piece of bread. "He's waiting for someone." Children who passed by on their way home from school would point and whisper, "Why won't he leave?" Their parents would shake their heads, offering the simple, incomplete answer: loyalty. Nurse Anna Carter, who shared a last name with the man inside the hospital, had been one of the few who truly saw the sorrow in Rex's eyes. One evening, as the winter sky bled into hues of deep purple and orange, Anna crouched beside him, her fingers tentatively reaching out. "Who are you waiting for, boy?" she whispered. Her breath formed a small cloud in the frigid air. Rex didn't flinch, didn't move, only flicked his ears slightly at the sound of her voice. She let her hand rest on the cold pavement beside him. "Someone must have meant the world to you." A deep exhale left the dog's nose, as if he understood, as if he carried a grief too heavy for words. Anna stayed with him for a while, watching the automatic doors slide open and shut, the lives passing through, the weight of their stories pressing against her chest. And when she finally rose to leave, she made a silent promise, to find out who Rex was waiting for. Memories that refuse to fade. Rex's memories of Daniel were stitched into his soul. He remembered the scent of the man's worn-out leather jacket, the deep chuckle that rumbled from his chest, the strong hands that had ruffled his fur after every long day. He remembered the walks through the quiet streets of the city, the way Daniel would talk to him, as if he understood every word. And he remembered that last day, the way Daniel had stumbled, clutching his chest, the way his breath had hitched, the moment he had fallen. Rex had barked, frantic, desperate. He had nudged Daniel's face, willing him to wake up, to get up, to fight. And then the sirens, the flashing lights, the strangers who had taken Daniel away while Rex could do nothing but watch. Now, weeks had passed. And yet Rex remained, standing outside the only place that had swallowed his world whole. He didn't understand words like coma or critical condition. He didn't know that Daniel lay in a hospital bed, machines breathing for him, doctors speaking in hushed tones about survival rates. All Rex knew was that his human hadn't come back. So he waited. The nights were the hardest. The city grew quiet, and the cold seeped into his bones. He curled up on the hard pavement, watching the hospital doors, fighting the exhaustion that begged him to close his eyes. Because what if he missed it? What if, in the one moment he wasn't watching, Daniel returned? So he stayed awake. He waited. And he hoped. The snow had begun to fall in slow, lazy spirals, covering the pavement outside St. Mary's Hospital in a thin, icy sheet. The city moved on as it always did, people rushing in and out, taxis honking in the distance, the distant hum of life uninterrupted. But Rex didn't move. He remained where he had always been, his deep brown eyes locked onto the entrance, his heart heavy with an unshaken resolve. It had been 42 days since they took Daniel away. 42 days since Rex had last felt the warmth of his human's hand ruffling his fur. 42 days since the sound of Daniel's voice had filled the air. And tonight, something was different. The hospital doors slid open with a quiet whoosh, and a stretcher was wheeled out, covered in a thick white sheet. The nurses walking alongside it had their heads bowed, their voices hushed. A man in a long black coat followed closely behind, his eyes red-rimmed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of grief. Rex's ears perked up, his body tensed. He knew that scent. Even through the harsh chemical smell of the hospital, he knew it. Daniel. Rex sprang to his feet, his paws slipping slightly on the wet pavement as he took a tentative step forward. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath quickening. The cold wind carried the unmistakable scent of the man he had spent his life beside. But something was wrong. Daniel wasn't moving. Rex's tail, which had lifted in hope, began to lower. His eyes darted between the stretcher and the man in the black coat. Something deep in his instincts, something primal and unexplainable, told him what his heart refused to accept. Daniel wasn't waking up. The man in the black coat, the doctor, paused for a moment, watching as the ambulance doors were pulled open. He turned to a nurse beside him, whispering something too soft to hear, then slowly lifted his gaze toward the German shepherd standing motionless a few feet away. His expression softened. The staff had seen this dog every day for over a month. They knew. The doctor hesitated for a moment before stepping toward Rex, crouching down so they were eye level. His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. He waited for him. The doctor murmured, shaking his head. All this time. Rex stared at him, his ears twitching slightly at the sound of his voice. But his eyes remained on the stretcher. The doctor exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. He turned back to the ambulance, and with one last glance at the motionless form beneath the white sheet, he stepped away. The doors slammed shut, and then the siren. A sharp, piercing wail cut through the cold night air. The ambulance's lights flashed, bathing the dark street in bursts of red and white. Rex's body reacted before his mind could process. His muscles tensed, his paws dug into the ground. He had to follow. This was it. This was the moment. Daniel was leaving, and Rex had to go with him. With a powerful lunge, Rex bolted forward, his claws scraping against the slick pavement as he raced toward the ambulance. His heart pounded wildly in his chest, his breath coming in sharp, frantic bursts. The tires screeched against the wet asphalt. The ambulance was moving. Rex sprinted faster, his legs burning as he pushed himself forward, the wind whipping against his fur. His eyes were locked on the red taillights, his mind screaming at him to keep going. Keep running. Don't stop. But no matter how fast he ran, the distance between them grew. And then it was gone. Rex skidded to a halt in the middle of the street, his breath coming in heavy pants. His eyes stayed fixed on the empty road, his ears still ringing from the sound of the siren. He had lost him. For the first time since that fateful day when Daniel had been taken away, Rex lowered his head. His body trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something heavier than anything he had ever felt before. He had failed. His human was gone, and he hadn't been able to stop it. The breaking point hours passed, but Rex didn't move. He remained in that same spot, his paws frozen to the ground, his eyes lost in the distance. Snow had begun to gather on his thick fur, but he didn't shake it off. Inside the hospital, Nurse Anna Carter watched from the window. She had been following Rex's story for weeks, feeding him when he refused to eat, checking on him when the nights grew unbearably cold. And now, as she saw him standing alone in the empty street, something inside her broke. She couldn't let this happen. Without hesitation, she grabbed her coat and rushed outside. The wind was sharp against her skin, but she barely felt it as she approached him. "Rex," she called softly. He didn't move. Snowflakes clung to his fur, melting into tiny droplets against his warm body. Anna knelt beside him, reaching out a hesitant hand to touch his damp fur. "Come on, boy," she whispered. "Come with me. You can't stay out here." But Rex didn't acknowledge her. For the first time since she had met him, his eyes, the eyes that always searched, always waited, were empty. Anna's throat tightened. She knew that look. She had seen it in patients who had lost someone they loved. She had seen it in grieving families, in the eyes of people who had watched someone slip away and had been powerless to stop it. She saw it every day. And now, she saw it in him. Gently, carefully, she placed a hand under his muzzle, tilting his head just enough to meet his gaze. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered. "Let me help you." For a long moment, Rex didn't move. Then, ever so slowly, his ears twitched. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was something. Anna exhaled shakily. "Come on," she coaxed, her voice softer now. "Come inside, just for a little while." She stood and took a step back, waiting. Rex didn't follow immediately, but after what felt like an eternity, he lifted one paw, then another, and then, for the first time in 42 days, he walked away from the hospital doors. Anna led him inside, where the warmth of the building wrapped around them like a quiet embrace. For the first time, Rex wasn't alone, but the ache in his heart remained. Because no matter where he went, one truth would never change. Daniel wasn't coming back. Rex lay on the floor of the hospital lobby, his body curled up near the entrance, ears twitching at every sound. The warmth of the building should have brought him comfort, but it didn't. It felt foreign. It wasn't his home. His home had been with Daniel. The nights spent by the old fireplace, the faint smell of smoke in the air. The quiet mornings when Daniel would sip coffee and scratch behind Rex's ears absent-mindedly, murmuring, "Mornin', buddy." But now, there was only silence. Anna watched him from behind the reception desk. She had convinced the security team to let him stay, just for the night. He won't cause any trouble, she had promised. He just needs time. And now, she sat in the quiet, her heart aching for him. A heart that refused to heal. Rex wasn't sleeping. His eyes remained half open, his ears alert, listening for something, anything that might tell him Daniel was still here. But he heard nothing. Anna sighed, pushing herself to her feet. She walked over and slowly crouched beside him, careful not to startle him. "Hey, boy," she whispered. Rex barely flicked an ear in her direction. Anna reached into her pocket, pulling out a small piece of food, a piece of chicken she had saved from her dinner. She held it out to him. "Come on," she coaxed. "You have to eat." Rex stared at it, unmoving. Anna's throat tightened. She had seen grief take many forms. But this was different. Dogs weren't supposed to grieve like this. They weren't supposed to wait like this. But Rex, he was different. "You know," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost someone once too." Rex didn't respond, but she kept talking anyway. "My brother," she said softly. "He was in the army. He didn't make it home." She exhaled shakily. "I used to sit by the window every day just waiting, because a part of me believed that maybe, just maybe, he'd come walking up that driveway." She swallowed hard. "But he never did." She placed the piece of chicken beside him. "I know it hurts," she whispered, "but you don't have to go through it alone." For a long time, Rex didn't move. Then, slowly, he lowered his head and sighed. Anna's heart clenched. It wasn't much, but it was something. The search for meaning. The next morning, Rex was still there. The hospital staff moved around him, some glancing at him with pity, others with quiet admiration. The story of the loyal German shepherd had spread through the hospital like wildfire. People whispered in the halls. He waited for his owner for weeks. He tried to follow the ambulance. Dogs don't act like this unless they truly love someone. Some of the nurses left small bowls of water near him. Others tried offering him food. But Rex remained where he was, his head resting on his paws, eyes locked on the doors, as if still waiting. Anna couldn't take it anymore. She had to do something. That afternoon, after her shift ended, she made her way to the hospital records office. She knew Daniel's name, Daniel Carter. And if there was one thing she needed to know, it was this. Was Rex truly alone now? She searched through the system, scrolling past medical reports, patient files, until finally she found it. Daniel Carter, age 57, retired firefighter, no listed family members. Anna's breath caught in her throat. There was no one, no wife, no children, no next of kin, just Rex. Her hands trembled as she shut the file. This dog had no one left, and suddenly she knew. If she walked away now, if she let him go back to the streets, no one else would come for him, and she couldn't let that happen. A desperate escape. That night, when she returned to the lobby, Rex was gone. Anna's heart stopped. She spun around, frantically searching the room. Rex? Nothing. Then she saw it. The front doors were slightly ajar. Her pulse spiked. She ran outside, the cold air biting at her skin. "Rex!" she called. The streets were dimly lit, shadows stretching long across the pavement. Then, movement. A dark shape, darting through the alleyway. Anna's chest tightened. Number. No, no, no. She took off running. A dog that wouldn't give up. Rex ran through the streets, his legs burning, his breath coming in quick, sharp pants. He didn't know where he was going. But his instincts told him one thing. He had to find Daniel. He had made a promise, and dogs don't break promises. He ran past the hospital, past the crowded streets, past the blinking neon lights. Somewhere, Daniel had to be waiting for him. He just had to keep going. Anna chased after him, her lungs burning. "Rex, stop!" But he didn't stop, because Daniel wouldn't have given up on him, and he wasn't going to give up on Daniel. The breaking point. It wasn't until Rex reached a familiar street, one lined with brick houses and old street lamps, that he slowed. His paws faltered, his breath hitched, and then his ears perked up. That smell. It was faint, almost lost in the winter air, but it was Daniel's scent. Rex's heart leapt. He turned sharply, sprinting toward the scent, his body trembling with hope. Daniel? He followed the scent to an old house, a place he recognized, even in the dim light. Daniel's home. But when Rex reached the doorstep, his body suddenly froze. The door was slightly open. Inside, there was no Daniel, only an empty house, coated in dust. Rex's tail lowered, his ears flattened against his head, and for the first time, the truth hit him. Daniel wasn't coming home. Rex let out a low, broken whimper. His legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed onto the porch, his body curling in on itself. Anna reached him moments later, her breath ragged. She saw the way his body trembled, the way his tail lay lifeless on the ground, and something inside her shattered. She sank to her knees beside him, wrapping her arms around his cold, shivering form. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know it hurts." Rex didn't move. Anna tightened her grip, pressing her forehead against his. "But you're not alone," she whispered. "Not anymore." Rex let out a shaky breath, and for the first time in 42 days, he closed his eyes. Not because he had given up, but because for the first time since losing Daniel, he wasn't waiting alone. The night stretched long and quiet as Anna sat beside Rex on the cold wooden porch of Daniel's empty house. The air was sharp with the scent of winter, a reminder of how much time had passed since warmth had last lived within these walls. Rex didn't move. His body remained curled, his breathing shallow, his once proud frame now reduced to something fragile, something broken. Anna wasn't sure how long they sat there. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. She could feel Rex's grief in the way he barely responded to her touch, the way his deep brown eyes stared blankly ahead. He had run all this way, chasing the last traces of Daniel's scent, only to find emptiness waiting for him. Anna felt a lump rise in her throat. She had seen loss before. She had seen people fall apart after losing the ones they loved. But this? This was something else. This was a love that refused to let go. Anna exhaled shakily, blinking back the tears threatening to blur her vision. She needed to do something. She needed to show him that life wasn't over, that love didn't have to die with loss. A choice that would change everything. Morning came slowly. Anna barely slept, too afraid to leave Rex alone. She had wrapped her coat around him at some point in the night, shielding him from the worst of the cold. But even now, as the sky bled into soft hues of pink and gold, Rex hadn't moved. She bit her lip, tightening her grip around herself. He can't stay like this. He would waste away if he continued like this, stuck in the past, chasing ghosts that could never return. And she couldn't watch that happen. So she made a decision. With slow, careful movements, she placed a gentle hand on his fur. "Rex," she whispered. "Nothing." She exhaled softly, pressing her forehead against his. "I know it hurts," she murmured. "I know you miss him. But he wouldn't want this for you." A soft breeze rustled the trees, carrying the faintest scent of pine and damp earth. Rex's ears twitched. It was small, almost nothing, but it was something. Anna swallowed hard. She had to push. "He loved you," she said softly. "You were his best friend. You were his whole world." A pause. Then, Rex let out a quiet whimper. Anna's fingers curled gently in his fur. "He wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life waiting for something that isn't coming back," she whispered. Rex's tail flickered slightly. Anna swallowed, her heart pounding. "Please, Rex, just listen to me." "I know you don't want to move on," she admitted. "I know it feels like letting go of him means losing him forever." She took a deep breath. "But you're not alone anymore." And then, for the first time in 43 days, Rex turned his head. His eyes, still heavy with sorrow, met hers. And Anna saw a flicker of something deep inside them. Hope. It was buried beneath the weight of loss. But it was there. The last goodbye. Anna knew what she had to do. She stood up, brushing the cold from her jeans. "Come on, boy," she said gently. "Let's go inside." Rex hesitated. His eyes flickered back to the house, the place where Daniel had once lived, where his scent still lingered in the air. And then, slowly, painfully, he stood. Anna swallowed the lump in her throat. He followed her inside. The house was exactly as Daniel had left it. Dust had settled on the furniture, but nothing had changed. His old firefighter uniform still hung neatly in the closet. His boots sat by the door, as if waiting to be worn one last time. Rex walked forward, his nose twitching as he took in the familiar scent. Anna followed behind him, watching with quiet reverence. Then, Rex stopped. In the living room, resting on a small wooden table, was a framed photograph. Daniel. Standing beside a younger Rex, his arms slung around the German Shepherd's sturdy frame, smiling in a way that spoke of nothing but love. Rex let out a small, broken sound. And then, for the first time since Daniel had left, he whined, a deep, sorrowful noise that shattered something inside Anna's chest. She knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his side. "I know," she whispered. "I know it's not fair." Rex lowered his head, pressing his nose against the frame. Anna blinked away tears. This was his goodbye. His final moment with the only family he had ever known. And when Rex finally stepped back, something shifted. He looked at Anna, his eyes still filled with grief. But there was something else now, something stronger. Acceptance. And as the morning sun finally broke through the windows, Rex took one slow step forward, and then another. Anna wiped at her face, swallowing back the overwhelming surge of emotion. "Let's go home," she murmured. Rex didn't hesitate this time. He followed. Not because he was leaving Daniel behind, but because Daniel would always be with him. And for the first time in 43 days, he wasn't waiting. He was moving forward. The first step into a new life. The road back to the city was long, but this time, Rex wasn't running toward the past. He was stepping into something new. When they reached Anna's small house, she opened the door and stepped aside. "Come in, Rex." He hesitated for just a moment. Then, cautiously, he stepped inside. The house was different. The scents, the sounds, the feeling. It wasn't Daniel's home, but it was a home. Anna watched as Rex explored, sniffing at the furniture, eyeing the couch as if wondering whether it was his place to rest. She smiled. "Go ahead," she encouraged, patting the cushions. "It's yours now." Rex stared at her for a moment. Then, with a quiet sigh, he jumped onto the couch, curling into a tight ball. Anna sat beside him. She didn't say anything. She just let him rest. Because for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to. Moving forward, never forgetting. The days passed, slowly, gently. Rex was still quiet. He still stared at the door sometimes, as if expecting Daniel to walk through, but he was healing. One night, as Anna sat by the fireplace, she felt something press against her leg. Rex. He placed his head in her lap, looking up at her with soft, grateful eyes. Anna's throat tightened. She stroked his fur, whispering, "You're going to be okay, buddy." And deep in his heart, Rex knew. He already was, Because love never truly dies. It just finds new ways to live on. And Daniel's love? It would always be with him. Always. The days passed like autumn leaves, drifting in slow, lazy circles before settling on the ground. The ache in Rex's heart was still there, a quiet shadow that never truly faded, but something inside him had begun to shift. He no longer waited by the door, ears pricked for a sound that would never come. He no longer ran through the streets, chasing ghosts that had long since left this world. Instead, he stayed. With Anna. She wasn't Daniel. Her voice was softer, her hands smaller, and she didn't smell like smoke and leather and old pine wood the way Daniel had. But she was kind, and she understood. She didn't ask him to forget. She didn't try to erase the past. She simply let him exist. And that was enough. A new beginning. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting the world in golden hues, Rex found himself in a place he had never imagined himself before. A dog park. It was a small, quiet place on the outskirts of town, where laughter filled the air and paws thumped against the soft grass. Anna stood beside him, watching the other dogs race across the field, their tails wagging, their eyes bright. She reached down, giving Rex a gentle scratch behind his ears. "You don't have to play if you don't want to," she said. "We can just sit. We can just watch." Rex glanced up at her. For so long, all he had done was watch. Watch the hospital doors. Watch the empty streets. Watch his world slip away, one moment at a time. But now, maybe it was time for something new. Maybe it was time to move forward. With a deep breath, Rex took a step toward the open grass, then another, and before he could think too much about it, he started running. Not away. Not toward something lost, but simply because he could. The weight of the past. Anna sat down on one of the benches, her gaze never leaving Rex as he moved. She had spent the last few weeks watching over him, nursing his shattered heart with patience and quiet understanding. But a part of her wondered, had she helped him enough? Or was he still holding on to something unseen? She leaned back, staring at the sky. The days passed like autumn leaves, drifting in slow, lazy circles before settling on the ground. The ache in Rex's heart was still there, a quiet shadow that never truly faded, but something inside him had begun to shift. He no longer waited by the door, ears pricked for a sound that would never come. He no longer ran through the streets, chasing ghosts that had long since left this world. Instead, he stayed. With Anna. She wasn't Daniel. Her voice was softer, her hands smaller, and she didn't smell like smoke and leather and old pine wood the way Daniel had. But she was kind, and she understood. She didn't ask him to forget. She didn't try to erase the past. She simply let him exist. And that was enough. A new beginning. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting the world in golden hues, Rex found himself in a place he had never imagined himself before. A dog park. It was a small, quiet place on the outskirts of town, where laughter filled the air and paws thumped against the soft grass. Anna stood beside him, watching the other dogs race across the field, their tails wagging, their eyes bright. She reached down, giving Rex a gentle scratch behind his ears. "You don't have to play if you don't want to," she said. "We can just sit. We can just watch." Rex glanced up at her. For so long, all he had done was watch. Watch the hospital doors. Watch the empty streets. Watch his world slip away, one moment at a time. But now, maybe it was time for something new. Maybe it was time to move forward. With a deep breath, Rex took a step toward the open grass, then another, and before he could think too much about it, he started running. Not away. Not toward something lost, but simply because he could. the weight of the past. Anna sat down on one of the benches, her gaze never leaving Rex as he moved. She had spent the last few weeks watching over him, nursing his shattered heart with patience and quiet understanding. But a part of her wondered, had she helped him enough? Or was he still holding on to something unseen? She leaned back, staring at the sky. The clouds were wispy, stretched thin against the darkening horizon. A few stars had begun to flicker into existence. She thought of Daniel. She had never known him, not truly. Only through the traces he had left behind. The stories whispered by nurses. The uniform still hanging in his old closet. The way Rex had loved him so deeply that he had nearly lost himself when he was gone. Daniel Carter had been a good man, and he had been loved, even by a dog who still carried his memory in every step. Letting go, holding on. Anna watched as Rex ran, his powerful legs cutting through the cool evening air. For the first time, she saw something lighter in him, something free. He wasn't the same dog who had waited outside the hospital for 42 days. He wasn't the same soul who had chased an ambulance into the night. He was healing, bit by bit, step by step. She swallowed the lump in her throat, smiling as she watched him move. "You would be so proud of him, Daniel," she whispered under her breath. And in that moment, a soft breeze swept through the trees, rustling the leaves, wrapping around her and Rex like an unseen embrace. Anna closed her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, Daniel was still here. Not in the way Rex had hoped, not in the way either of them had wanted, but in the way that love never really leaves. And in that moment, she knew. Rex would be okay. They both would. Because love wasn't about holding on to the past. It was about carrying it forward. And as Rex ran through the grass, his tail high, his ears pricked to the sky, Anna felt it. Daniel's love. Still here, still alive. Not in a house. Not in a voice. Not in a waiting game that could never be won. But in movement. In love that kept going. And in a dog who, after so much loss, had finally learned how to live again. A new home, a new life. That night, as they walked home from the park, Rex stayed close to Anna's side. His head was held higher now, his steps lighter. Anna felt warmth bloom in her chest. For weeks he had been drowning in grief. But now he was starting to swim. When they reached her front porch, she opened the door and stepped aside. "Come in, Rex." He hesitated for just a moment. Then, cautiously, he stepped inside. The house was different. The scents, the sounds, the feeling. It wasn't Daniel's home, but it was a home. Anna watched as Rex explored, sniffing at the furniture, eyeing the couch as if wondering whether it was his place to rest. She smiled. "Go ahead," she encouraged, patting the cushions. "It's yours now." Rex stared at her for a moment. Then, with a quiet sigh, he jumped onto the couch, curling into a tight ball. Anna sat beside him. She didn't say anything. She just let him rest, because for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to. Healing. Together days turned into weeks. The snow melted. The air grew warmer. Spring was coming, and with it, a new beginning. Anna and Rex fell into a rhythm. Morning walks, evening runs, quiet moments by the fireplace where neither of them spoke, but both of them understood. They were two souls who had been lost, and now they were finding their way together. One step at a time, one breath at a time, one day at a time. A love that never fades. One afternoon, as Anna sat at her kitchen table, she reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she finally typed a message. To Firehouse 82. "Hi, my name is Anna Carter. I was wondering if any of you knew Daniel Carter." She hesitated. Then, she added, "I have his dog, Rex. Within minutes, her phone buzzed. The message was simple. "We remember Daniel. We remember Rex. We'd love to meet him." Anna swallowed hard. She glanced down at Rex, who was curled up on the rug, his ears flicking as he dreamed. He had lost Daniel, but he hadn't lost the people who had loved him. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for Rex to see that love never truly leaves. It just finds a new way to live on. She reached down, gently stroking his fur. "Come on, buddy," she whispered. Rex's eyes fluttered open. "Let's go see some old friends." And as they stepped out into the world together, Anna knew. They were both finally home. The road stretched ahead, bathed in the soft golden light of late afternoon. Anna walked with Rex by her side, their steps in sync, their silence comfortable. The firehouse wasn't far now. For weeks, Anna had wondered whether bringing Rex here was the right decision. Would he recognize the place? Would it remind him too much of Daniel? Would it hurt? But looking at him now, as he walked with quiet confidence beside her, she knew this wasn't just about letting go. This was about keeping love alive. The firehouse stood at the end of the street, the red doors open, revealing the world inside. A place where men and women trained, laughed, saved lives. Daniel had belonged here, and maybe, just maybe, Rex did too. A welcome that meant everything. A small group of firefighters stood outside, their uniforms slightly dusty from the day's work. They had heard the story. They had heard about the German shepherd who had refused to leave the hospital doors, about the dog who had waited and waited and waited, and now he was here. One of the older firefighters, a man with graying hair and kind eyes, stepped forward. His name tag read Matthews. He crouched down, extending a hand. "Hey there, boy," he murmured, his voice rough but gentle. Rex hesitated for only a second before stepping forward. He sniffed the man's hand, his nose twitching, his body tense. Then, he relaxed. The firefighter ran his fingers through Rex's fur, his voice thick with emotion. "You remember this place, don't you?" Matthews whispered. This was Daniel's second home. Rex lifted his head slightly, his deep brown eyes locking onto Matthews. Something passed between them, understanding. Daniel had been here. Daniel had loved these people. And now they were here for him. One by one, the other firefighters stepped forward. Some spoke softly, some just smiled, but every single one of them had something in their eyes. Respect. Because they knew. They knew that loyalty like this was rare. They knew that love like this never fades. Not alone. Anymore. Anna stood back, watching the scene unfold, her heart swelling in her chest. For weeks, she had worried about Rex. For weeks, she had wondered whether he could ever truly move forward. And now, she knew. He wasn't forgetting Daniel. He was honoring him. By continuing, by living, by finding a new home, a new family, a new purpose. Matthews finally stood, brushing dust off his uniform. "We'd love for him to come by more often," he said, turning to Anna. "Daniel would have wanted that." Anna smiled, glancing down at Rex. "What do you say, buddy?" she murmured, running her hand over his head. Rex didn't hesitate this time. He wagged his tail. And for the first time in months, Anna knew that everything was going to be okay. The message that matters. Somewhere, someone is waiting for a sign. Someone is struggling with loss. Someone is holding on when they don't know how to let go. But this story, Rex's story, reminds us of something powerful. Love never truly dies. It lives in the moments we carry forward. It lives in the memories, in the people who remain, in the ones who refuse to let it fade. Rex never let go of Daniel. But he learned how to live beyond the loss. And if he could find a way to keep going, so can we. If you're listening, if you've ever lost someone, If you've ever felt alone, if you've ever thought that grief was too heavy to bear, remember, Rex. Remember that love doesn't vanish. It just changes. It finds new places to grow. And just like Rex found his way home, you will too. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. And when that day comes, you'll look back and realize they never really left you at all, because they're still in the way you love, the way you remember, the way you keep going, even when it feels impossible. So, if this story touched you, if it made you feel something, share it. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear it. Join the conversation. If you believe in the power of love, of resilience, of never truly being alone, leave a comment below. Tell us who you're remembering today. Tell us who's still with you, in the quiet moments, in the memories that refuse to fade. Because love isn't about saying goodbye. It's about carrying them with you. Always.